So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the topic of applying, appealing, and advocating for yourself, the bottom line on benefits. We are very happy to be joined by representatives from Liner Legal, who will be providing a overview of the disability application and appeal processes. This webinar is being recorded, so please be aware of that this information is going to be shared online. And we'll also ensure that you receive the slides from today's presentation afterwards as well. Just a few words about NAMI Greater Cleveland. We are the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We are an organization dedicated to improving quality of life and empowering individuals with mental illness and their family members. And we do that by providing education, support, information and referral, and advocacy. So some of the services that we provide that you can avail yourself of are our peer or family-based support groups, our peer and family-based educational programs, including community education like today's presentation. And we also have a helpline that you can call Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, if you have questions about referral to services in the community, including mental health and substance use, but also beyond to other resources in Cuyahoga County that may be helpful for you or your loved one. So the focus for today's presentation is really going to be on Q&A. We imagine that many of you that are attending today's program have specific questions or concerns that you would like to ask our presenters for their suggestions, or learn more information about Liner Legal and the whole disability process. So please use the chat feature for questions during our Q&A period. Since there's about 15 of us so far on this call, that might be the best way to go, but you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question as well when we get to that point. Please remember to remain muted when you're not speaking so that we can have no background noise while our presenters are presenting. And the last thing I'll ask of all of you when we conclude is to complete a short evaluation. Lisa, I know you're saying you can't hear. I think that's an issue on your end. But I'll ask you to complete that evaluation at the end, and we will make sure all the information from today's presentation is shared with you afterwards. So with that being said, I will let Michael and Jordan begin their presentation. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you everybody for tuning in. We're so appreciative of being invited back to talk to you guys and answer questions and share a little bit about the disability process. My name is Michael Liner. I am a disability attorney. Our law firm is based right here in Cleveland, Ohio. We're actually this month celebrating our 10-year anniversary. And I have on here with me, she's much easier to look at, Jordan Paratori. I want to give Jordan an opportunity to just introduce herself and explain what she does. And I'm also expecting that as we go, when you guys have questions in the chat, I'll kind of let Jordan, just so I can be focused on the presentation and you all. And feel free to ask questions at any time, but I'll at least have Jordan monitoring the chat so she can cut me off to tell me when people type in there. But Jordan, do you want to tell a little bit about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you again, Matt and NAMI, for having us. We love NAMI, and I refer a lot to NAMI. I'll get to that in a moment. So I'm Jordan, and I'm the client concierge with Liner Legal. And I assist our clients with getting connected to resources within the community. So a lot of our clients are coming to us, and Michael will speak more to this about sort of the life of a case with us. They're coming to us really struggling financially, mentally, emotionally. And what my job is just to connect them with anything in the community that might be helpful to them. So whether it's a bill assistance program or a food pantry nearby, any mental health resources. So I refer a lot to NAMI, and I refer a lot to different agencies. Mental health agencies within the Cleveland area. So I sort of help with things that outside of the case, as you know, our paralegals, our attorneys are working with the case. I'm working with things outside of the case. If any of you are representing the mental health community, I love to refer and work closely with case managers just to kind of help collaborate with our clients and make sure that they're getting the best help that they can. So thank you again, and I'm here to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, so Jordan has a very unique role, as you may have picked up on, because most law firms are only employing people to work on disability cases. But the biggest problem with the disability process, as you'll hear me talk about during the body of my presentation, is that it's slow, it's long. I mean, a disability case can take anywhere from 4 months to a decade. If a case has to be appealed enough back and forth to hearings, we have cases that we've been working on for 10 years, which isn't to say that that's the average at all. An average disability case takes about 1.5 to 2 years. But as you can imagine, during that time, people have all kinds of other challenges come up along the way. And Jordan's job is to help fill those, plug those holes in their lives, because really believe that it's important to have a holistic approach to disability. And when our clients don't have housing or they don't have food, treating, seeing their doctors and counselors, their treatment team almost becomes secondary, which makes it more difficult for me to actually help them. So there's almost a catch-22 there. So Jordan's job is to plug the rest of the holes that come up for our clients while they're applying for disability. But I'm going to share my screen now. I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to kind of talk us all the way through. I do want to let you guys know, that this isn't even though I'm going to be talking based on the PowerPoint. Hold on, I'm just trying to figure out how to share this. Here we go. I'm not going to just be reading from this. Now let me get over here so that I can go to presentation mode. 1 second, slideshow from the beginning. All right, here we are. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what is the definition of disability. What does that mean? And it's a multi-pronged definition. We're going to talk about the different types of disability benefits and the differences between them. We're also going to talk about what the differences between them is not, because there's so many misconceptions about that. We're going to talk about, as Jordan mentioned, the life of a disability case, and what the process often looks like. And I told you that the biggest problem with these claims is how long they take. They're very slow. And then we're going to talk about some tips, some takeaways that you guys can have from this presentation if you are applying for disability. Again, I want to invite you all to ask questions during the course of this. I just want to, as Matt cautioned you, remember that the presentation this morning or this afternoon is being recorded. So what you ask me on here will be, I guess it's going to go on NAMI's YouTube page. So if there's anything private or personal, what you might want to do is instead, at the end of the presentation, our contact information is there. And it might be, depending on what your question is, it might be best to email me if it's something specific or personal to you, just so that your information's not forever out there. So what is Social Security disability? Social Security disability is, in its simplest form, it's a government benefit. So these are benefits that are given to people by the Social Security Administration. You have to apply for it. And it's for individuals who are unable to engage in any substantial gainful activity. I'm going to explain to you what that means. I'm going to get through the definition. I'm going to come back and I'm going to chop it up into 3 parts. That's the first part, though. Individuals who are unable to engage in any substantial gainful activity. The second part is by reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment. And lastly, which can be expected to result in death, or which has lasted or can be expected to last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months. So now I've kind of gotten to the end of it, but I'm going to rewind, and I'm going to, first start talking about what is substantial gainful activity. SGA is an amount of money. Essentially, in order to receive Social Security disability or SSI benefits, you have to be unable to, like it says, work at an SGA level, which means this year you have to lack the ability to earn $1,470 per month. It changes every year. Last year, the amount was $1,410. In 2021, it was $1,350. So it goes up every year. Social Security is continually adjusting it based on inflation in the economy. But what that means is while you are applying for disability or receiving disability, you cannot work and earn more than this year, $1,470 per month. That is a gross amount, not a net total. So, there's people who might earn $1,700, $1,800 per month, but after taxes or health insurance or whatever other deductions there might be, it ends up below that 1,470. This is the 1,470 is the amount that there can be prior to any of those deductions. Okay, that's important. That's the first part of the definition. The second part is by reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment. Okay. And there's a few takeaways from that I want to get across from you. You can't get disability because of a symptom. You have to have a diagnosed medically determinable physical or mental impairment. It doesn't matter what it is. If you, and it's important that you understand that mental impairments are absolutely qualifying, because there's a lot of questions about that as well. But you can't receive disability because you're sad or apprehensive. You can receive disability because you have a major depressive disorder or a generalized anxiety disorder or whatever your diagnosed impairment is. Now, it's very important that you have if you're applying for disability, that you have a psychological evaluation done by what's called an acceptable medical source. Social Security can't take your word for your limitations. People can't self-diagnose themselves. We also run into challenges at times where I'll have clients whose only source of treatment ever, even diagnostically, was, for example, with a social worker or a counselor or a caseworker. The medically determinable impairment, the medically determinable part of that means that it has to be an impairment that was diagnosed by a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a PA. In the psychiatric world, it can be a psychologist or a PsyD, but you must be treating for your impairments and be appropriately diagnosed. And then the last piece here is what's called the durational requirement. In order to receive disability, you have to have an impairment which is either going to result in death, so something shorter term in case you might not be able to live a full 12 months, or have an impairment which would last for at least a year. Where the durational requirement becomes more important in these cases is a lot of times when people have like acute physical injuries, or even sometimes a diagnosis like a cancer, where somebody can go from diagnosis to complete remission in 6 to 8 months. If your impairment is not expected to last for at least 12 months, or unfortunately result in death, it wouldn't meet what's called the durational requirement. Okay, so that's the basic definition of what disability is, and there's so many directions that you can go with it, and we'll keep talking about that. But next, I want to talk about the types of disability benefits that are offered by the Social Security Administration. Okay. The first type of benefit is called SSDI. It stands for Social Security Disability Insurance. A good way to think about SSDI benefits is it's essentially like receiving your retirement benefits early. It's based on your FICA taxes, having worked and paid into Social Security, okay? And like it says here, under the eligibility part of this table, you have to have, for people who are 32 years old or over, it's slightly less for people who are younger, just because they wouldn't have had the same opportunities to work. You have to have earned 20 quarters of work credits in the last 40 quarters. I don't know why that says quarts. I apologize for that. Previous 40 quarters, which essentially boils down to you must have worked and paid into Social Security for 5 of the 10 years immediately prior to becoming unable to work. Okay, so SSDI is based on your work. There's also disability benefits that are available to adult children. So, you know, where adult children, people who become unable to work between the age of 18 and 22, can receive disability benefits on their parents' work record. There's also widows benefits, where people who are between the ages of 50 and 60 can draw disability benefits on the work record of a deceased spouse. Okay. Now, those basic requirements for SSDI benefits are different than the requirements for SSI benefits. SSI, just so everybody knows, stands for Supplemental Security Income, okay? As opposed to SSDI, for which you have to have generally worked and paid into Social Security for 5 of the 10 years immediately prior to becoming disabled. SSI, a good way of thinking about it is that it's like a welfare benefit for people who are disabled. It's needs-based though. So you don't have to have ever worked. There's no work requirement. However, you do have to have limited income and resources available to you. Generally speaking, and this is important, somebody can't have more than $2,000 in countable assets. For a single individual, $3,000 if you're a partner in a married couple. And what that means is they're not going to, just so everybody knows, the $2,000 and $3,000, they're not going to look at the value of a house if you live in it. So if you live in a house, but then you have a property that's in your name elsewhere, that's a countable asset towards the $2,000 or $3,000. But the home that you live in, regardless of its value, if you own it, is not an asset that's counted for SSI. And you can have one car for a single individual, 2 cars for a married couple that won't be counted towards the asset requirement. So, you know, theoretically, somebody could live in a $2 million house and drive a Rolls Royce, but if they don't have anything in their bank account, anything in stocks, bonds, anything that's, you know, quickly liquid to cash, you might still be eligible for this needs-based benefit. That's, I've never heard of that scenario where somebody had, you know, a multi-million-dollar house and a fancy car, but they were still eligible for SSI. But theoretically, you could. My point is to say they're not going to look at the value of a home if you live in it. They're not going to look at one car for a single individual or 2 cars for a married couple when they're looking at those at the asset requirement. SSI benefits are also available to children who are disabled. So if you have a child who it's not about your work at that point, you know, the definition of disability for individuals is about somebody's ability to work. For children, it's a totally different standard. We're not going to spend too much time on that today, but it is important to know that there is a such thing as SSI benefits for children. Now, I've talked about what the differences between the benefits are. I want to pause here, kind of go off this slide and talk to you for a second about what the difference between these benefits is not, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there about this. I will have people that ask me, you know, I just need the short-term disability benefit. I don't need the longer-term one. Remember the definition of disability from the prior slide here. Regardless of what type of disability benefit you're applying for, you have to have an impairment that is expected to result in death or has lasted or can be expected to last and keep you from working for at least 12 months. There isn't a short-term benefit, disability benefit, and a long-term disability benefit. There's just one standard requirement. A lot of times people will say, I just want the benefit for people who have mental health issues. It doesn't work like that either. The standard, again, from the prior slide is the same. You can receive either benefit for having any type of impairment, physical or mental. The difference between SSD and SSI really is that SSD is for people who have worked and paid into Social Security, and SSI doesn't have that work requirement, but it does have an asset and resource limit instead, okay? So I'm going to kind of move on from talking about you know, just the basic eligibility criteria and talk about some of the features of them. An important one is the impact that it has on health insurance. Remember when I said that it's a good way to think of SSD benefits is like it's drawing your retirement early? As a result, SSD benefits, if you're eligible, comes with Medicare, which is the medical benefit that people who are 65 or over, people who are drawing or about to draw retirement, receive. That comes with SSDI benefits, as opposed to SSI, which does not come with Medicare. Medicare is through the federal government. However, SSI does create immediate eligibility for Medicaid. That's health insurance it's through the state government, okay, local state government. In Ohio, and I'm speaking to an all Ohio audience, so I can say this now, the Medicaid coming with SSI used to be much more important. It still is important, of course, except since 2014 in Ohio, we've had expanded Medicaid eligibility. 10 years ago and longer, I would have a lot of people who were applying for SSI, and sure, they wanted you'll see below, $941 a month. That's the most that you can receive in SSI. They wanted the money, but what was most important to them was the Medicaid, because, before we had expanded Medicaid in Ohio, one of the only ways that you could get Medicaid was to receive SSI benefits. Now, pretty much anybody who would fall under the income and asset threshold for SSI, even without the determination of being found disabled, is already eligible for Medicaid. So it's just become a little bit less important that that's a feature that comes with SSI here in Ohio, but it still does. And then I also just kind of want to talk about how much people receive with the benefits. I already talked about how with SSI benefits, the most that somebody can receive per month is $941. That's fixed by statute every year. So it changes every year. Last year it was I want to say it was $914 was the amount for, actually, I think it was $874. I'm going too high here. What it was in 2022. And it goes up with the cost of living adjustment every year. The amount that you receive from SSDI benefits, because that's a benefit that's based on your work history, it's based on how long you worked, how much you earned, and how much, and your consistency of earning over the years. It's like an actuarial calculation that's done. So I can't, when somebody says to me, how much am I going to receive? The best answer is call Social Security and ask, because it's not something you can just easily type into a calculator and calculate. But because SSDI is based on your taxes and paying in, the more you've paid in, the longer you've paid in, the larger your monthly benefit amount would be. The max this year, there's, you can receive for one person up to $3,300 or $3,400 per month this year. So it's a pretty large amount. Few other features of the benefits that I want to talk about before I just kind of move on and start talking about the process is, people say, well, am I eligible for back pay while I'm applying? Yes. But there's a difference between the two types of benefits. With SSD benefits, you're eligible to receive back pay actually up to a year before you've even applied. If you demonstrate that you were out of work and unable to work during that year, you can actually receive benefits before you've even applied for them. However, with SSI benefits, you're not eligible to receive them until the month after you applied. So if somebody, just to give you a scenario, if there were to be somebody who applied for SSD and SSI benefits, because you can apply for both, and they were have been unable to work since sometime in 2021, with the SSD benefits, they might actually be able to eligible to get disability if they were to apply today back to July of 2022. However, with the SSI portion that they'd receive, they wouldn't, if they applied today, they wouldn't be eligible to draw any money in back pay until next month. That's when the payments would start, till August of 2023. The process for these benefits, okay? Because this is, we talked about this. This is a process. I'm going to kind of talk you through how a typical disability case goes. So, as I'm sure you all imagine, every disability claim begins with an application. You've got to apply for them. There's many different ways that you can apply. You can apply. The way that Social Security is really trying to push people to do their applications now is over the internet. SSA.gov is where that application is. However, you can also go into a Social Security office. They've reopened after the pandemic and apply in the office. You can apply over the telephone. You can call Social Security's national hotline. I'll give the number in case anybody's writing this stuff down. It's 1-800-772-1213. But you can call that the national hotline for Social Security and schedule an appointment to apply over the phone. They also, believe it or not, still have paper applications that you can request. I don't think that there's many people doing those anymore. But there's 4 ways that you can technically apply for disability benefits. Now, after you apply, what happens is Social Security begins to compile information. They'll have you fill out a few different forms. One is called the work history report, where they're going to ask you about the work that you've done in the past 15 years. And then there's a form that's called a function report, where they ask you about your daily activities, what you do every day, how you're limited every day. They will get your medical records from all the sources that you tell them that you have. They may or may not send you to see to a medical exam, which is called a consultative exam, which is paid for by Social Security, to be evaluated by a doctor paid for by them. And usually the average wait time for an initial application in Ohio is between 3 and 6 months, okay? But when you look at the chart here, you see about 2/3 of people who apply for disability are turned down. They're told that they're not disabled. So what it means is it is normal to be denied. The expectations for people when you apply, unfortunately, are that you're going to be turned down and told you're not disabled, okay? What you should not do when you're turned down is give up. I also tell people, don't just file a new application. That percentage denial rate doesn't change because you turn in a new application. It's important to appeal, okay? And the denial letter that they send spells out an entire appeals process. The first appeal that gets filed is called reconsideration, where here in Ohio, your application will go back down to Social Security in Columbus to review the information in the application once again to determine if they can come to a different conclusion. But look at that denial rate. 90% of reconsideration appeals are denied. So if you get denied once, you're almost certainly going to be denied a second time. What they do at the reconsideration stage, pretty similar to what they do at the initial application stage. They'll ask you to fill out a form called the disability report, which gives you an opportunity to talk about any changes to your condition since you originally applied. It will, they'll get any new medical records that may have been missed and any updated medical records, but almost certainly you're going to be turned down a second time. The average wait time for an answer on a reconsideration appeal is about 3 to 5 months. It's slightly less than the initial application. Again, do not give up when they deny you. File the next appeal. The appeal is called a request for a hearing. And a hearing is where your case will be reviewed by an administrative law judge. You'll have a hearing with an ALJ. Interestingly enough, most hearings now are done on the phone or on video. Actually, most hearings are just done on the phone. They're a phone call. They're not even a video like this. That's changed a lot by COVID, but it seems like it's here to stay. Where it seems pretty unlikely that hearings are going there. You can request an in-person hearing, but judges seem to be much happier just doing the phone calls that they can do from their own home. The process for a hearing is the same regardless of whether you go in person or whether you're doing it over the phone or video. It's not going to be any different. And just to kind of I'm thinking out loud a little bit, but I want to give you guys as much good information as I can if you happen to be in this position right now. We have a lot of clients that will say, I really want the judge to see me. I don't think that unless they see me, they're not going to understand my case. During the height of the pandemic, when there was no option, all hearings were done on phone, the approval rate actually went up. So like the national approval rate actually went up. So, judges are not deciding cases based on how you appear. They're deciding cases based on your medical records. In fact, I think that the hearing process itself, nobody's being approved because of how they testify or what they tell a judge is wrong with them. What's important, and the next slide really hits on this, is your communication with your doctors. Cases are won and lost based on what your records say, not based on your, how you testify or a judge seeing you. So at least, I do encourage my clients, since judges like doing phone hearings, you should strongly consider doing a phone hearing for your case. If a claim is denied by a judge, though, and that is historically where people have their best chance of being approved, that's our practice is mostly directed towards getting people to a hearing with a judge where they have their best chance of an approval. But if it's denied by a judge, an ALJ, the process doesn't end there. There are additional appeals. The next appeal after that is called the Appeals Council, where there's just one appeals council for the whole country. They're reviewing all of the appealed ALJ decisions for the entire United States. And then you can appeal a claim all the way through the US federal courts, truthfully up to the United States Supreme Court. Although, the United States Supreme Court, when they take on a disability case, they're not taking on a question of whether one individual person is disabled. They're going to be really looking at issues that affect, the common, issues that affect the public at large. So, questions of vocational expert testimony and other more nuanced issues. But the point is, you can appeal a case into the federal district court all the way through the United States Supreme Court. Okay, so it's a long process, but, kind of piecing together the wait time. If a claim is approved at a hearing, which is where most cases get approved if they're going to be approved, if you're approved at your first hearing, usually it was about a year and a half on average since you did that application. It's really slow. If you have to appeal beyond that to the Appeals Council, federal court, before you ultimately get a remand, this case, like I was saying these cases, like I said at the beginning, can take 5 to 10 years, depending on how many appeals to federal court and back you have to file. So there is no cut and dry amount of time that you should expect a case could take. That's why I like just instead putting it as an average, where an average case takes about a year and a half. Okay. This is probably the most helpful, important part of the talk. But these are the things that I really want you guys to be thinking about if you're applying for disability benefits. Without question, like I was saying earlier, the most important thing that you can do is to focus on your treatment, okay? Because people don't get approved because of what they tell me is wrong or because of how they fill out any of that paperwork that I told you Social Security is going to ask you to fill out. They don't approve you because of how you testify. If you do not have medical records that support your inability to work, it is going to be almost impossible to receive disability benefits. This is especially important for people who are applying for disability with mental illness. Why? Because it's more based on your own reporting. And so, if all you're doing is filling out the forms that Social Security is sending and saying, I don't leave the house, I can't get out of bed, common mental health symptoms, I'm struggling to focus and concentrate, I have difficulty interacting with other people. If all you're doing is filling that out on the paperwork for Social Security and it's not being adequately reflected in your own treatment records, the odds of Social Security adopting that into their own findings and awarding the benefits is very small. So what you should be doing is seeing a specialist for any impairment you have, but especially a mental health impairment. That means regular follow-up with hopefully a psychiatrist or at least a psychiatric nurse practitioner, ongoing therapy or counseling or whatever could be recommended to help your condition, you should be doing. Okay, because if you're not treating and you're not going on to the next bullet here, reporting your daily limitations to your provider, the odds of being awarded benefits go down drastically. Okay. The way that people get approved for disability benefits is the same way that they get better. So, a point that I like to make when I'm speaking to groups is to tell you, don't treat to get disability, treat to hopefully improve your symptoms and get better. What that means is every time, don't just go to your appointments and expect that the therapist or doctor is going to ask all the questions. Go there and tell them how you've been since you last saw them. If you had a week where you couldn't get out of bed, make sure that they know and know why you couldn't get out of bed. If you are having a lot of interpersonal difficulties where you're not getting along with other people, or you're struggling, to interact appropriately, make sure that you're telling your doctors about that routinely every time you see them. If you are, any of your symptoms that are affecting your ability to work, you should be telling that to your providers at every single appointment that you have, because that's where Social Security is going to get their information from. I'm going to go to the fourth prong, and then I'm going to come back to the third. So I'm going to going on a little bit out of order here. But another thing that's extremely important, this really just comes down to following prescribed treatment for you. So abstinence from drugs and alcohol as much as possible, because that can really muck up a disability case, especially one that's based on mental health impairments. A lot of times Social Security will just assume, well, if this person's abusing a lot of drugs, no wonder they're having mental health symptoms. No wonder they're hearing voices, or they're having mood fluctuation because they're using mind-altering substances. The best way to avoid Social Security making an assumption like that is just to not be using any, not be using drugs or alcohol, and then following the prescribed treatment. I already talked about, going to the doctor, going to the counselor, reporting the symptoms. It's also important that you follow the treatment that's prescribed for you in between. I will tell you, the things that I find tend to be most common in successful mental health disability cases are things like more aggressive forms of treatment, like TMS, ECT treatments, the really high dosages of medication and treatment-resistant symptoms, or a significant amount of hospitalizations, even when somebody is treating and doing everything in between their appointments that they're supposed to be doing. I'm telling you guys those things not because I want anybody to hear that and say, go into their appointment and say, I want to try ECT treatment. No, I just want you to understand that the deck is stacked pretty high when you're applying for disability. And a lot of times Social Security will say, well, if you're just seeing a doctor, a mental health, prescriber every 3 months and getting monthly counseling, that's routine treatment, which is not indicative of necessarily disabling symptoms. Okay. So I just kind of want to put that out there and say what I see in more successful mental health disability cases. As I promised, I'm going to jump back to this third prong that's on here, the third bullet point, which is conscientious form filling. And what that means is the forms that I told you that Social Security is going to send you to fill out, they don't send you those because they actually want to know how you're limited from you. They're looking for people to quickly fill them out and not do a great job of describing their symptoms. Or not describing, how they're limited every day. So when people quickly fill out the paperwork that they send and they don't explain how their health issues are limiting them, Social Security uses the forms against them to poke holes in their claim. For example, the forms that Social Security sends, that ADL form, the Activities of Daily Living report, it'll ask how is are you able to cook? It asks a question like that. And a lot of times people will just check yes, and they'll move on to the next one. Then when a judge or adjudicator is reviewing the case, they say, well, if you can cook, McDonald's is hiring, okay? And ignoring everything else. So instead, under where they ask that question, can you, cook or do you prepare meals? It's important that you explain how your limitations impact your ability to do work. That's what I mean by conscientious form filling. Okay. So here's a hypothetical answer. You know, yes, I prepare meals, but meal preparation is limited to, you know, cereal, you know, making a bowl of cereal or making a sandwich, or batch cooking. You know, I will have clients that tell me that they do all of their cooking. They'll cook for an entire month at once and freeze everything. When you ask why, the answer is they don't know when they're going to feel well enough to be able to do that again. Explain that when you're filling out the form that Social Security sends, because if all you're doing is checking the yes box, Social Security's response is going to be, these aren't limitations, or you're not describing a degree of limitation that's necessarily supportive of a total inability to work. And they will use your own words against you. They'll use your own form against you to say, well, if you can do this, you can work. If you can clean, you can be a cleaner. If you can cook, you can be a cook. So explain how what you do is different, or how it's limited by your impairments on those forms. We have about 18 minutes left, and I'm not saying that because I want to cut anybody off. I'm saying that because I'm going to stop talking and hogging the time so that I leave enough time to answer your questions. I'm going to leave our contact information up here so that we can, so that you guys can reach out to us if you have a more individualized question that you don't want to, you know, spell out for the whole group. Jordan, do you kind of want to moderate from the chat, and we'll see if anybody has any specific questions that they want to say in voice?
Yes, we do have a question from Evan. He's asking, at what stage of this process does legal representation become necessary or is advised? Okay,
very, very good common question that we get asked. One thing to understand is it's up to your comfort level. You know, it used to, when I started practicing 13 years ago, most people were waiting to hire an attorney until they were denied twice and got to the hearing stage. Okay. I think the reason that a lot of people did that is because they, you know, wanted to potentially avoid having to pay a lawyer if they were approved at an earlier stage. The problem is that the paperwork that Social Security sends, like the conscientious form filling, thinking about that point that I put out there, they send this paperwork right after the application is done. So if somebody is unable to really be thoughtful in the way that they're approaching the buildup of their case, if they're handling their own communication with Social Security, they may, you know, kind of be shooting themselves in the foot while they're applying, you know, while they're going through the claim, to the point where once it gets to a hearing, which is where many claims are ultimately approved, they've filled out paperwork wrong or said things to an adjudicator that will be used against them at a hearing later when you want a lawyer to help you. Right now, Jordan, would you agree probably like 75% at least of people that are coming to us are hiring us before we've even applied, before they've even applied?
Yes.
We have 2 people in our office who all they do is fill out applications for clients all day long. That's their job, is just to fill out applications for our clients. What that allows us to do is to handle all their communication. When you retain an attorney, now this isn't every lawyer's office. I'm just telling you how we do it. Because I realize that, you know, people are hiring us to be their advocates, but I can't do that if, you know, you're communicating with Social Security on your own. When you hire us before you've applied, we're going to assist you with the application. And then after the application is turned in, you don't speak to Social Security at all. If Social Security has any questions for you, they're going to contact us. Or you would tell them to contact us. If you have questions about your case, you would be contacting us instead of calling Social Security. Our job is to be the mouth, ears, and eyes for you know, Social Security for this case. So it's, again, it's about your comfort. There's some people who want to try and see if they get approved. I get it. I do think that there's a reason why more people want to hire a lawyer now, because these cases are getting trickier, and our job is to filter that communication and make the case as strong as possible when it gets to a hearing. But again, it's up to an individual's personal preference how they approach it.
Okay, another question for you, Michael. My brother was in the system years ago. Does this help fast track him through the process? Can he tag off of his previous case with the new case he is applying for?
It depends how many years ago it was. There is something that's called expedited reinstatement, but expedited reinstatement was only there if benefits were terminated or stopped in the last 3 years. So if by years ago you mean 10 years ago, no, you're just starting from the beginning. It's the same process as everybody else. Even with expedited reinstatement, they're still going to adjudicate the claim the same as before. It's just in certain circumstances, there's a presumption of symptoms or a presumption of disability, and they may pay you while they're reviewing the claim. So I need a little more specificity to know if that's possible. But if if your brother's been off of benefits for 3 years or more, then no, it's just an application like any other.
Okay, another question for you. My daughter applied for SSI before the pandemic and was denied. She moved out of state and she's still suffering from the same severe depression as in Ohio. Does she apply again in the new state or appeal the decision from Ohio?
So you only have 60 days after a denial to appeal it. So if she was denied before the pandemic, obviously more than 60 days ago, she would have to start the process over with a new application. I do, just because when we talk about new state, yes, it will be worked up at the local office, which is tied to your zip code and where you live, but it's not a state specific process. It's a federal process. The Social Security Administration is nationwide. So everything that I've said here applies regardless of where she is.
Okay, someone asked about our fee, but I answered that in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Are there any other specific questions?
Just want to encourage everybody, if you have questions that you weren't comfortable asking to the group, or especially because we're recording this, please reach out to us. We're happy to answer them for you, do what we can to help. But I'm not seeing any other questions, Matt. Again, I do want to thank you for inviting us and for giving us the opportunity to talk a little bit about this. It's a challenging process, but the most important thing that I said is don't give up with a denial appeal, because so many claims get stalled with that denial, and people just keep repeating this cycle of applying, getting denied, and reapplying instead of appealing. And the key is to keep the case moving forward.
Yeah, not seeing any more questions, but as I said at the beginning, I will make sure that you receive, if you attended today's webinar, I will ensure that you receive these slides, and I will also upload the recording for this webinar to our YouTube channel later in the week. And I'm having a little trouble with my Outlook right now, so I can't access the survey that I'll have you complete. So I can't put it in the chat now, but I will send it in a follow-up email to everyone who attended. And if you could please complete that survey for us, just to let us know. Oh, looks like we have one more question in the chat from Mary Bell. I have a client that is an adult and her mother has custody of her and would like to resign that and give her daughter back the custody. How should she work with that? I'm assuming they mean guardianship. I don't know if that's something that you're able to speak at all on, or that's its own topic.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I tell everybody I'm a one-trick pony. All we handle is Social Security cases or disability claims, and so I don't want to advise on anything that's outside my expertise. I got really, really good at one thing, and I'm sticking with it.
Yeah, I would say that we do have a webinar on our YouTube channel that we offered last year with the Cuyahoga County Probate Court, which was all about the topic of guardianship. So Maribel, I would suggest you go to our YouTube channel, just look at NAMI Greater Cleveland, search that in the search bar on YouTube and look for that webinar on guardianship, and that might give you some guidance. And there's also the information, the contact information for the probate court. I might be able to just pull up their website and put that link in the chat for you to give you some direction on that topic, which, you know, is complex in its own way, as I'm sure you're aware. Yeah, so I'll put that in the chat. Okay. So looks like we don't have any other questions. So look for an email from me later today with the slides and the evaluation link. And you can watch this webinar at a later date on our YouTube channel if you like. Thanks to Michael and Jordan for joining us. And thank you all for being with us today. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you.